or somehow different. They live in societies where they have been taught, conditioned, and they've learned that that group is the enemy. Very often, the targets that are being the target populations that are being victimized have a history of persecution. Again, think about Jews in Europe and the whole history of anti-Semitism. So that there is a ready reservoir of stereotypes and prejudices that can be drawn upon by political leaders. And what you have these ordinary people, when you talk to some of the people in Bosnia, for example, they're just ordinary folks. And the people they were targeting were their neighbors. But they had been fed a steady diet from their government news agencies that they're coming to get you. They're going to kill you. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. They've been after us since the 1300s. And now's their time. So you need to do your duty. You need to be a good citizen. You need to be a patriot. Why would my government lie to me? I mean, that was the reaction. I don't think that's funny, right? I think that's actually scarily true. And it is about creating a certain attitude. It's about creating a distance between different populations, and it's about feeding into certain kinds of attitudes and prejudices. And those people participate. They don't want too many of them, but they feel they have to. And in some cases, there are perpetrators who have to. In Rwanda, for example, we saw a lot of people who were perpetrators because they were told, if you don't participate with us as we hack apart these people, you're going to join them. And that is the reality. But for many others, they see it as a hard but necessary duty for their society, their people. It's not to say there aren't people who get a kick out of it. There are those kind of sadists. If you read any of the literature, you find there are always that small fraction of people who do that. But most perpetrators are ordinary folks. And that kind of one of the things I often try to, let me just take this one step further. A lot of times people ask me, what can I do? Right? What can I do? In regards to genocide, there are a lot of options and there's no one choice. I mean, there are a lot of organizations out there that are involved in working to prevent it, being politically active and helping your government hopefully make smart choices and good choices around these issues. But personally, in addition to all of those, my answer always is, how do you treat the people in your community, the people around you in your life? Because genocide isn't the only kind of violence I study. I do a lot of work, for example, in schools around bullying. And one of the things that was such an amazing awakening to me was listening to the schoolyard bully talk about why they were doing what they were doing, and it was mirroring exactly the language of the perpetrators of genocide. Violence is connected. It's about, let me put it this way, the processes we engage in that allow us to harm other human beings are the same, even if the context or the type is different. And so I would argue, the way in which we prevent genocide is we create communities where we do not do the kind of things that help make it possible. Where you take a look at, how do we treat people in our community who are different? How do we stereotype, do we label, do we, continue with some of these old historic prejudices? Are we bystanders to the suffering of others? All genocide, all bullying actually, takes place with bystanders. Whether it's the international community or the people within that community itself, that society. We live in a society now where there are different populations being scapegoated for different problems, that are being labeled and stereotyped in certain ways. We live in increasingly heterogeneous communities. And so, my feeling is the ways in which we treat people in our own lives is part of that larger issue, in a very real sense. You had your hand up, and then you, and...
Excuse me. I was going to say I'm going to take it back to day one and look at society as a whole. And, isn't it inherent in the human race that we are, we're tribes? We kind of split into tribes, and we have this thing about those that are different, and this has gone way back in time.
This is part of a broader issue, the potential for violence.
Right.
We are a violent species. All the research, for example, looking at human history, human prehistory, even early evolution. Think about the research being done on chimpanzee violence, where we find chimpanzees rape, they engage in murder and warfare and all kinds. We are a violent species. There's no denying that. However, it is not something that is always acted upon. Whether we're talking about interpersonal, we all have the potential for violence. When was the last time most of you were in a violent confrontation? My guess is, I hope, probably not too recently. Because the potential is there doesn't mean it is inevitable, that our behavior is predetermined. In some ways, the analogy we might look at is crime. You know, crime is inevitable. Not everyone's always going to follow the rules, but that doesn't mean we stop fighting against it, that we stop trying to make our society safer and better. And I would argue this issue of genocide and violence is the same. Not every state engages in genocide, even though many of the factors that have been connected to other genocides may exist. It is a choice that some states make. And the work is in making sure that they don't make those choices anymore.
I agree with you that we need to go back and start at the bottom with families and education to stop this idea of bullies and each one having to think they were better or lesser than others. But my original question is, are you aware of any major worldly or national effort to try to prevent or overcome the oceans rising and the idea that we may be without pure water? Are we gearing up for that at all to desalinate the ocean waters?
Well, we're not even sure global warming is happening.
Whatever we want to call it. Drought, whatever.
No. We should
be thinking about that.
You're absolutely right. And there are increasingly dire warnings that are coming out weekly about the consequences of inaction. Unfortunately, most governments have not been moving forward to the extent that is necessary. There are too many interests that oppose it, too many people that still believe it's not happening. You know, when they're standing in water, anyway.
They'll be standing on top of your shoulders.
Well, right. But what's I think is happening, the weight of evidence is becoming ever more clear. And the voices of protest and communities and people speaking out about it are becoming such that it's becoming increasingly difficult for state leaders to ignore it. Whether or not it will be enough and in time, there are a lot of scientists who are talking about these tipping points that, you know, even if you start right now implementing some of these drastic changes, there's a lot that we cannot prevent at this point. We can only ameliorate it. There is no international organization of political leaders who are working truly to really address this. There are different conferences and there are different kind of seminars or meetings and different political initiatives, but it is still pretty scattered, buckshot kind of stuff, yeah. It's scary.
Yeah.
One way that I've been impressed this morning is, I think when I came here, I thought of genocide as a very high specialization in terms of the field of study, and now I see it as a hugely interdisciplinary and complex matter. I'd like to ask you a simple question,
Okay.
if it is possible to simplify. In the same manner as the Turkish government and the Turkish people seem to deny the Armenian genocide, is there a denial of genocide here? Is there a nation here that has been founded upon what is functionally genocide, even if the term had not been coined 2-3 centuries ago? And is historical recognition part of what we can do as the solution?
I have no idea what you're talking about. The United States has perpetrated genocide in its history.